as Jim just said, they formed this group, and there's been 2 meetings. One of the meetings was this week, so I've only been to 1 meeting, but it was valuable. And I just wanted to tell you, because it took a lot of head scratching, because I approached this from a very, very skeptical viewpoint. Being invited by the Canadian Energy Association, or the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, who I hear about on the Vancouver News all the time, to become part of some internal working group. And it's like, oh, what's all that about? So I had to really go through a process. See, they've already trained me to talk differently, to think about whether we want to move forward on the whole thing or not. So why would you join this? And there was a number of reasons that I kind of landed in favor of why you would join this. One of the things that it really was going to help me learn how the industry thinks and operates, because we're really going to have access to the top people within those companies. So it gives me a chance to have my nose under the tent, and if you know the Middle Eastern saying about the camel's nose under the tent, you know what the rest of that saying is. It also gave me access to the top executives instead of having filtered through governmental relations people or PR people. I've got the emails now. If I hadn't liked something that I heard about Enbridge yesterday, I've got the email for the COO of Enbridge, and I could have talked to him about that. So there's access there to people you don't normally have access to. It also gave me the ability to learn the Canadian system, because like we've heard, they don't do things exactly like we do on this side of the border. So I was hoping that I was going to learn best practices that go on in Canada that maybe could be replicated in the U.S. and vice versa. If there's things going on in the U.S. that might help Canada, like transparency. PHMSA has done an amazing job of putting up all kinds of stuff on the website that you don't find in Canada at this point. Also get to learn a lot of new things. They talk about social license a lot in Canada. You don't hear that much down here. There's this sense from these companies that their social license could be removed if too many people get ticked off at them. I'm not sure that's ever really happened, but it seems to be something they worry about. There tends to be more of these external review panels and a verification process up in Canada than we see down here. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. So I really wanted to kind of try to wrap my head around that and see whether there's real value that we should look at down here. It helped me learn the metric system, which I think I was supposed to learn in 6th grade when the U.S. was going to convert to that, until we decided we're too ornery and it was too easy, so why would you want to do that? The first time I flew into Calgary, I got into my hotel room, and the room was freezing, and I went up to the thermostat, and it was set for 16 degrees. And I was like, well, what the hell is that? And I had to do a conversion on my computer to figure out what I was supposed to set it to. When I was at the NEB panel 2 years ago at their thing, I was on a panel, and one of the panels, and I think there was 3 or 4 other people on that panel, and they asked us to introduce ourselves and tell us something that had nothing to do with pipeline safety about us. And the first 3 or 4 people talked about their curling teams, and I was like, oh, I really am somewhere different now. And then one of them, they introduced me to poutine, and it's like, okay, I go up to Vancouver quite often now. And then they talk different up there too. Lots of process. There were certainly concerns with joining too. I saw the benefits, but there was concerns because it was it was another time drain. It was going to cost the organization money. Jim talked about compensation. Well, there is no compensation. They cover travel costs and stuff, but it was going to be time out of my busy schedule to go up there and stuff. So it was an unknown time drain. We didn't know what we were really getting into. I knew that there will be groups both in the U.S. and Canada that will see my name on a CEPA website at some point and think that I've somehow been co-opted by the industry. So there was that concern. And there's also the concern, and we talked about this with our board of directors, about, okay, all of a sudden my name's on a CEPA website somehow. Can the industry up there somehow use us? So we talked about those things, and we talked about that pretty openly at the first meeting. I was glad when I got in the room that the other members had the same concerns. The other thing that we hear all the time on this side of the border, and if you look at the Integrity First program that CEPA is doing, if you look at it and you read the words, it makes perfect sense. You see this from Inga. They have their, I can never get it right, if it's their 9 commitments to this, and API has their commitments to landowners, and it's all bullet pointed. And those things always look lovely, but then as we heard yesterday from people like Emily and others in the room, the individual companies don't always follow those 9 commitments or those 12 commitments or those 4 promises to landowners. So that was one of the things that I was really interested in. These are things I want to focus on this panel is there a way to make sure that the Integrity First fine words, and they really are, if you read the program, I encourage you to, it sounds really good. Are we going to turn that into real action from these companies? And one of the ways that can turn into real action is if the industry and those member companies really hold each other accountable. So I'm dying to see how this develops, because oftentimes, and you heard it yesterday, how companies aren't doing what they've committed to do as part of a trade organization. And it'll be interesting to see if CEPA as a trade organization and the member CEOs that make up that organization really can find a way to hold each other accountable if someone isn't living up to what they say they're going to do. And I think the one that most of us all worry about is safety really first? Because just about everybody always says safety is our first priority, but then you see people do all kinds of things based on how much money can we make, how quickly. So that tension certainly will always be there. And the one that I'm really interested in is, can we find a meaningful way to judge and report back out to the public how this safety effort's going? You know, I think everybody's struggling with that. I'm on a number of committees with PHMSA right now looking at data, trying to come up with, okay, what data is really what? And how can we tell the story to the public about how things are progressing? I think it's the same thing with this effort that CEPA is going through, because there's a strong component of it of reporting out and verifying that things are doing. And that's one of the things that I've seen different in Canada than in the U.S. The Canadian, I'm going to get it wrong, the Chemical Industry Association of Canada was the folks that developed responsible care, which Integrity First is kind of based on. It's spread over into the U.S. and a number of other countries around the world, but the piece of it that didn't spread over into the U.S. is the verification piece. When the chemical industry looked at responsible care here in the U.S., they rejected that idea, because it's done in a very powerful way in Canada, where they go to the industry experts, they go to local communities and those chemical plants are situated in, and they let those communities choose people to decide how well they're doing. And they form these, verification panels chosen by the communities that can be affected by the chemical industries to go through a process, and there's the 3 steps to it there, to verify whether the chemical industry is doing what they're saying they're doing. Here in the U.S., the chemical industry rejected that idea. They didn't really want that camel's nose under their tent. In Canada, they seem to embrace that more. I'm still learning whether it's true or whether there's certain ways you can, affect who's chosen to be on these things, so it makes it maybe a false process. We're going to find out. Oh, process. I slipped back into the U.S. version. And I'm just going to show this slide again, because as I was skeptical going to the first meeting up there, I was worried because, it was pretty easy for CEPA to choose people to be on this panel that would be all pretty agreeable. So I didn't know whether we were going to be, in this fake harmony side where everybody in the room was going to, be an oil and gas cheerleader, or whether we really were going to kind of embrace the conflict and have those discussions that would lead to something meaningful. So I entered the room pretty skeptical, and almost immediately it was an Aboriginal representative of this thing, made it real clear that we were going to embrace the conflict. And I was happy to see that. I didn't have to be the only one in the room, and it wasn't just him either. There was multiple ones. So I find it interesting so far. I think it's valuable. I'll certainly report back out to the community and to the public, what I learn out of this process. And at this time, time will tell how valuable it is. We're just really starting down that road.